Welcome to Enviro Close-Up. I am Carl Grossman. With me is Dr. J.M. Gould, and he is the author of a new and already landmark book. The title, The Enemy Within, the High Cost of Living Near Nuclear Reactors. And perhaps I can just read from the dust jacket, Dr. Samuel S. Epstein. He's the author of Politics of Cancer, the preeminent occupational health physicist, physician in the United States, professor of environmental and occupational medicine, School of Public Health, University of Illinois in Chicago. He says, with a wealth of backup data, Gould raises critical and unanswered questions on the risks of breast cancer and other hazards of living near nuclear reactors. However controversial, we ignore Gould's warning at our own peril. Dr. Gould, for years the nuclear establishment, and because it's not just the nuclear industry, you're looking into governmental nuclear reactors as well as commercial nuclear reactors. For years the nuclear establishment has maintained that, yeah, we could have a catastrophic accident. And in fact, one occurred at 3 Mile Island and another occurred across the ocean at Chernobyl. But the routine operation of nuclear power plants is not particularly dangerous. Why your book, indeed, in my judgment, is a landmark is you show that death has been done already, and the numbers are not small.
Yes, the reason for it is that there has been a debate for the last 50 years among nuclear scientists about what is called the dose response to low-level radiation. By low-level radiation, we're not talking about background radiation, with whom humans have lived for millions of years. And over that course of time, our immune systems developed the capacity to resist natural forms of radiation, like cosmic rays and radioactivity in the soil. But in 1945, suddenly, with the birth of the nuclear age, fission products that never before existed in nature were released from the operation of nuclear reactors and from the explosion of bombs, particularly radioactive iodine and strontium, which, as they say, never existed in human diets. But after 1945, they're omnipresent in human diets, and the low-level radiation refers to the internal radiation set up by these fission products once they lodge in certain critical organs. In the case of radioactive thyroid, it's the fetal thyroid that is most heavily affected. In the case of strontium-90, it's the bone marrow, which is where the immune system really originates. So that the debate is really over whether there is any level of internal radiation low enough to be considered safe. And all of the animal experiments on which the old standards were based had been extrapolated to human experience without any indication that that is possible, because you have to give mice enough radiation, enough strontium-90 to kill a certain proportion, so you're unable to discover what happens at levels low enough to make them sick but not kill them. And cancer is an illness, and it may take as many as 30 or 40 years before you die. But once you have that impairment of the immune response, you have a very dangerous situation. Now, I can illustrate this by 2 charts that represent really the heart of the argument of the book. The book uses official figures in every case to make the point of the danger of low-level radiation from nuclear emissions at whatever level. For example, and also news stories that have never hit the newspapers. One of the most startling is an admission that came from the Department of Energy 5 years ago, during the Bush administration. Apparently, the Hanford nuclear weapons complex, the first in the country, had admitted that they released large amounts of radioactive iodine in the 40s. And this has given rise to 27,000 plaintiffs suing the various companies that operated the Hanford complex. And as a result of this pressure, the DOE admitted that in 1945 there had been a release of radioactive iodine from Hanford, which was so large, it's of the magnitude of Chernobyl, which we all agree is the worst human accident in human history. I'd like to give you that figure because it's so enormous, it's unbelievable. They said that in that year, 1945, in the haste to make plutonium for the first atomic bombs, they released 550,000 curies of radioactive iodine. And what that means is this. We nowadays measure the radioactivity of strontium in milk and water in terms of a picocurie, where a picocurie is a trillionth of a curie. So what they're admitting is that in that year, the American population of 150 million people were exposed potentially to a per capita level of over 4 billion picocuries per person. An enormous exposure. And we found that there were two epidemiological anomalies that started in 1945, which can only be explained as a result of that enormous introduction into a pristine atmosphere. After millions of years of developing an immune capacity to resist natural forms of cancer, this is what happened. The first chart shows the rise from 1945 to 1965 in the percentage of low birth weight live births in New York State. In the period, say, 1945 to 1965, you see an enormous rise of 40%. This is the baby boom generation, mind you. And along with that, an enormous comparable increase in the amount of strontium-90 found by the UN in human bone for much of that period. We show it actually from 1945 to the year 1990 or 1995. But just centering on that first 20 years, it's clear that that enormous epidemiological anomaly means that a large part of the baby boom generation had their immune systems compromised at birth. And we've been able to trace the consequences of this in every decade after. For example, in the 50s, there was an enormous epidemic increase in cancer in children aged 5 to 9, starting in 1950, 5 years after 1945. In 1963, when children born in 1945 reached the age of 18 and started taking their SAT exams, you had a mysterious decline, again for 20 years, in the low birth weight percentage of children who had been born 18 years before during this period, which I think characterizes the worst period in human history, because they were exposed to the above-ground atmospheric tests, which we now estimate as equivalent to the explosion of 40,000 Hiroshima bombs.
Dr. J.M. Gould, if people would like a copy of the book, there's an 800 number?
Yes, 1-800-626-4848. Let me repeat that, 1-800-626-4848. You'll get a copy of the book within 2 or 3 days. It's $14.95 plus a small mailing charge.
Thanks, Dr. Gould, and thank you for watching.